Welcome to a Friday edition of Beyond the Arc. I'm John Gonzalez alongside our NBA insider, Bill Ryder. No Ash today. She's taking a little R&R. But we have so much to discuss, Bill. You're back, by the way. You were on the East Coast. You were in Boston, and then you were in New York for people who missed Wednesday. I think we were last on Wednesday, but you were in this room with, I don't think it had any windows or anything on the wall. I was concerned about your health.
I've been arrested in Boston. Yeah, Shawshank detention is what I called it. It was not great. It's good to be back.
But now you're back. You're back among your Harry Potter books, and all is well with the world.
Yes. Yeah. That's right. You don't get the Muggle rep. Yeah. Let's just suffice it to say, yes, good to be back with Harry Potter, my children, in Manhattan Beach, not far from you. Good to be home.
That's right. Fair. Yeah. I'm famously aware of Harry Potter, but have not consumed any of that content. So I'll have to get to it eventually, and then we can be conversing in it. All right. As I mentioned, we have a ton to get to later in the show. The first big trade happened. Alex Caruso is going to OKC and Josh Giddey is going to the Bulls. We'll break that down, and we'll discuss which teams can challenge the Celtics for the championship next season. But first, we're going to start with the Lakers. They hired JJ Redick as expected. It's a 4-year deal at $8 million per. Bill, that is, I did the math, less than the 6 for $70 million that they offered Dan Hurley. JJ Redick played in the NBA. Checks out. JJ Redick played in the NBA for 15 years. He served 8 years as a podcaster, 3 as a broadcaster. He evidently wants to surround himself with an experienced staff. Reports are that he's looking at Scott Brooks, Sam Cassell, Jared Dudley, and maybe even Rajon Rondo. Top line takeaway here, Bill. What do you think?
I think that I have no idea. And John, I really think anyone who is speaking with certainty on what JJ Redick is going to do is self-delusional or pretending they know what's going to happen. It could go either way. And I know we'll get into the reasons why. What I'm sure of is it is going to be phenomenal content. Phenomenal basketball. Could be. Good. Maybe it won't be. The content.
So good.
Is going to, and yet there's time with Rich Paul saying LeBron and Bronny aren't tied to each other, which is whatever. Not true, probably. And we have a small list of people who have made this leap without coaching experience. And JJ Redick, very smart guy, thinks he's a very smart guy. Happy to tell you if he doesn't think you're a smart guy, how smart of a guy that he is. So my main takeaway is this could go many directions. And I'm very curious to watch the circus, let alone whether the circus is successful or not here in LA.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to work out for the Lakers or for JJ. I hope it works out for JJ because I've gotten to work with JJ a little bit in the past, and I think he is a smart guy and very talented, and I'm rooting for him. I know for certain it's a win for the Beyond the Arc podcast and NBA shows everywhere, because no matter what happens, this is going to be phenomenal content, as you mentioned. I'm wondering what you think, though, about who's taking the bigger risk here. I have my ideas, but do you think it's a bigger gamble for the Lakers or for JJ?
So I think it's a really good question. I think it's a bigger risk for the Lakers. So there's 5 guys. There's 5 head coaches in the NBA who have made this leap with no coaching experience of any kind. One of them is Steve Kerr. Now that obviously worked out, but I don't think he counts because he had previous big time front office experience, right? So he had been around basketball operations. One is Jason Kidd. That, to your, I think, really important point, has worked out for Jason Kidd. It did not work out for the teams he was at beforehand. You've got Derek Fisher, didn't work out. Mark Jackson, I would argue, didn't work out. And my neighbor, Steve Nash, who it didn't work out for. But if you look at the list of guys that have done this, that have never had any kind of coaching experience and have coached in the NBA, even for the guys where it didn't work out for the teams, I would argue it worked for Mark Jackson. I would argue that it very much worked out for Jason Kidd. I think it's a bigger risk for the Lakers because you don't know what you're going to get. What JJ Redick gets is the opportunity to coach at the NBA level. There's only 30 of these jobs. He, as you said, is an incredibly smart guy. So if he's able to showcase his basketball acumen that it translates to coaching, even if it doesn't work with the Lakers team, and I'll be curious your view, John, that I don't think have very high expectations. I don't think you look at this Lakers team and say that's a top 6 team and they're a lock to make the playoffs. So I think expectations are low around the league for the Lakers, even if they're high internally. So for me, big risk for LA, pretty good spot for JJ.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that internally the expectations are warped relative to what the rest of the league sees as a reality for the Lakers. I mean, we were talking before we came on about it's probably 13 teams in the Western Conference that are going to be vying for 10 playoff spots,
Isn't that
right?
crazy?
And it's going to be a dogfight, but I'm going to go the other way on the question. I think it's a bigger risk for JJ because the Lakers have had 7 different head coaches since 2011 when Phil Jackson left. 7. And the average stint is about 2 full seasons, less than 2 full seasons for these guys to go through. So like JJ, yes, he obviously wants to coach. He's been pretty plain about that. I mean, he interviewed or talked to the Raptors previously. He interviewed or talked to the Hornets previously. And on Pablo Torre's podcast, he had indicated that, as many as 6 teams had reached out to him about potentially being, if not a head coach, then an assistant with their organization. So he clearly wanted to get back into it. But Bill, he has a burgeoning media empire here. I mean, the Mind the Game podcast was doing real numbers, as is Old Man in the Three. They also have the Road Tripping podcast with Richard Jefferson and Channing Frye and like Allie Clifton. Like that's a good show as well. He employs a bunch of people. Then he's got his ESPN duties. He could have done. I understand wanting to coach and get back in the juice. And he was talking about like it's different when you're in the locker room on the road after a win.
Right.
You can't replicate
the
that.
Adrenaline.
But
yeah.
Yeah, but it's tough to walk away from like a business that he built. And I wonder what happens to that. I know a bunch of people who work for him and does that continue without him? Who takes it over?
I mean, as you noted, Math Wizard, he's getting $32 million, right? So you're walking away from a business, but you're not entrepreneurial in the sense you're walking away from a job like my buddy who went to Silicon Valley and then became a billionaire, right? Where there was actual risk there. And let me add it to your point, because by the way, I think both of our answers are right. I think it's a huge risk for the Lakers and a huge risk for JJ, which is why it's going to be such great content. I read about this today. It's not the primary point, and it's going to sound like a hot take. It's not. Coaching LeBron James is a massive opportunity. It's also a massive challenge. It's a really difficult job. Most of the guys that have coached LeBron have been fired. One of there's 2 guys out of 7 who have not been fired, who have been coaching LeBron James and been fired, or in Luke Walton's case, mutually parted ways. One is Eric Spoelstra. I covered that team. LeBron tried to get him fired 17 games into the season. And the other guy who didn't get fired under LeBron is Ty Lue, who got the job because LeBron certainly helped get David Blatt fired. And I'm not rolling for Blatt, but Blatt was 30-11 when he went away and Lue took over. So there's these massive expectations. LeBron I think the juice is worth the squeeze there, but he is not easy to manage. He expects to be more of a partner, right, than being someone who is coached. I have walked in on a practice before, and we've talked about this, during the finals of Blatt, where I wasn't supposed to be there. I needed to get a backpack, where LeBron was running the practice, and Blatt basically looked like he wasn't allowed to speak. Now, presumably, this will be a different situation. LeBron, you would imagine, signed off on JJ. This is all presuming LeBron's going to be there. I think he will be, but it's not certainly done yet with the report out there that, as we expected, he's going to opt out of that deal. But you're right, John, because I think coaching LeBron is tough. I don't think it's easy. I think it comes with massive expectations. And this is true of Jordan. It was true of almost all stars. Kobe, if things don't go well, you are not going to blame the superstar. Whether you should or shouldn't, whether they're 40 this year or not, you're going to blame the coach. And so I think it is a risk I think the right answer to your question is option C, all of the above.
Yeah, both. Yeah, for sure. So you bring up a couple of points here that are interesting. What do we think? Because again, the rest of the league, and this show certainly looks at the Lakers and go, well, you have LeBron and you have AD, and those are 2 good building blocks. You and I did our best duos in the NBA the other day. Not surprisingly, those 2 guys ended up landing on it, but they do have a lot of questions. They're super capped out. They got to figure out if D'Angelo Russell is going to pick up his player option. If he does, that makes life a lot easier for them because one, if he leaves, it's going to be very, very difficult with the new CBA for them to replace him. And if he comes back, not only do you have him under contract, but also you could potentially flip him in a deal. So that would be hugely helpful for him. But like they have roster construction issues on this team. And as we mentioned, there's going to be 13 teams out of 15 in the West who think that they can make the playoffs next year, including those Los Angeles Lakers. So my question is, what does success look like for like realistically, like what, because they're not going to win a championship next year. So like, what could JJ point to and be like, oh, you know what? First year, this was successful.
This is why this is sort of a poison chalice here, right? Like you're talking reasonable success, not within that Lakers bubble. I like Jeannie, but not within the bubble of Jeannie Buss or Rob Pelinka or what they're selling to Jeannie. Make the play-in and advance out of the play-in, but that feels optimistic to me. They're not a top 16.
I think they're
not going to be in the top 6.
I don't think so either. If they were in the top six, I would say that's automatically a win. That's where you go, wow. Like
Agreed.
Considering the competition in the Western Conference, look what we did. Yeah. And with Rob Pelinka being handcuffed really in terms of roster construction going into this offseason. I mean, they're going to make some moves, but it's limited options for them. Yeah, I'm with you. I think they're more likely a play-in team. So anything north of that, I think would be a win, but it's so skewed and warped the way that they look at what success is with the Lakers that I'm with you that I wonder whether or not they'll be like, oh, well, we did this last year. We did this with Darvin Ham. Like we brought you in to do something else. And also LeBron wanted you. My other question for you, and we've touched on this previously, but we have to bring it up because we're back here on CBS Sports Network and JJ just actually got hired. Are they going to keep doing the pod?
I hope so for you and me, John. But
I hope so too.
They shouldn't. No, I mean,
they should. They should. It would be so good.
They should for you and I. But if JJ Redick,
yeah,
I don't know, if he called you and said, John, my guy, I need some advice. What should I do? The advice you should give him is don't do the podcast. Don't, because the problem, it's not just the way that it looks. This is the going narrative, and it's a good one. The way that it looks to the rest of the team is sort of problematic. The other problem becomes if LeBron turns on you or gets frustrated, and in any relationship, these things happen. I've been married for a long time. Love my wife. I don't know why she loves me. Not always. It's valleys, not just peaks, right? If things get rough between JJ and LeBron's the kind of guy that will let that be seen on a podcast, right? He'll be passive aggressive. It's just, it's a window into things that don't need to be seen, whether that relationship's going swimmingly, alienating Anthony Davis or other people potentially, or this is going to happen. LeBron can be tough. LeBron's put out any given day of the week or week of the month or month of the season, and he's directing that on a podcast that becomes really awkward and you can kind of see it. So if I'm JJ, hell no, absolutely not. Do not go anywhere near that podcast during the season.
I think the Mind the Game podcast with LeBron, probably not, but would it be materially different for him he did a podcast. He started doing his podcast for Yahoo while he was still a player, and he was just having other players on. They were just talking about the game. Would it be that much different for him to do that same thing, which is the old man in the three now for his company, with Lakers players, have a rotation? They come in, they just talk shop.
I crave it. I want it. If JJ's watching, he should do it. JJ, turn the TV off. Stop watching CBS Sports Network for 30 seconds. Has he turned the TV off?
Yeah.
He shouldn't do it. He should not do it. I think it's a terrible idea. Here's the other thing. I know JJ obviously
time-wise
thinks he can coach.
Too.
Yeah. JJ thinks he can coach. I hope he can. I'm rooting for everybody. Pelinka thinks he can coach. We don't know if he can coach. He has literally never coached before. Forget coach at the NBA level. We don't know if he can coach. And so if you do have that learning curve, if it doesn't go well, if there's some equivalent of you spilling water like Jason Kidd back in the day because you don't know what to do and you're panicked, do you really want to be on any podcast every week dodging the question or not dodging the question? And he doesn't do well with criticism in some of these situations. If you listen to some of his radio hits that he's done around the country, which is fine, it's part of the thing. I would avoid as much as I can being a podcast host where trying to learn to be an NBA head coach, or a podcast host who's trying to be an NBA coach.
I'm so excited about this. JJ, do the podcast. Keep rolling, buddy. Everything's going to work out fine. It's going to be great. We're going to take a quick break. And then on the other side, we had a lot of news yesterday, including the fact that we had a big trade. Josh Giddey on the move to Chicago, Alex Caruso to the Thunder. We'll get into that on Beyond the Arc. You are watching CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to Beyond the Arc on a Friday. John and Bill here. You're watching us on CBS Sports Network, but you can also find us in podcast form. Please download, subscribe, leave us a review wherever you get your favorite shows. All right, Bill, I love the offseason, man. Such fun stuff to talk about. We had our first trade yesterday. I really do. It's just great content. We had our first trade, and this is something that we have talked about previously on this program, which was the weird fit for Josh Giddey in Oklahoma City. Couldn't close with him in the playoffs. Ended up coming off the bench a couple of times for the first time in his career. You and I were like, eventually they're going to have to move on from Josh Giddey. They moved on from Josh Giddey. Kind of surprised, though, that they ended up getting Alex Caruso from the Bulls pretty much straight up. They got a $2.8 million trade exception in it, but just starting here, any surprise on your end that it was a straight up deal? Like you could get Alex Caruso for Josh Giddey straight up?
Yeah, well, let me say this. I do want to frame it a little bit differently, or just add to this, because I'm sure you saw this. Sam Presti did release a statement that I thought was eyebrow-raising, because Presti is usually very reticent to share anything with the media, saying that, in effect, he traded Giddey because Giddey wouldn't come off the bench. So there was obviously some disharmony there. And I could be wrong, because Sam's like an impressively cutthroat person. I don't mean in a bad way, but he's very ambitious and driven and has sharp elbows, and that is his rep around the NBA, and it's worked for him. But he doesn't make stuff up. So obviously, Giddey was unhappy with the direction they wanted to go with him. I think it is an amazing deal for the Thunder. I am shocked that the Bulls did not get more picks, not just in a vacuum. In any trade, if this were the trade, you should be getting picks. But the fact the Thunder have 132,000 picks they're never going to use, it doesn't even make sense that Chicago couldn't conjure some from them. That said, I am probably more inclined than NBA Twitter to think that it is an interesting decision for the Bulls. I don't hate it. He's 14, 7, and 6 over the course of his career. Obviously, his shooting woes, and if you dive into it when guys are within 6 feet of him, when guys are guarding him, all that stuff, the numbers go way down. We saw him not play particularly well, not shoot particularly well in the playoffs and get benched. I understand all that. I actually don't hate it for Chicago. I mean, Giddey is still really young. What is he, 21, 22 years old, 21 years old. This is the dude who I think has upside, John. So I don't hate it for Chicago. I don't understand why they didn't get more. I think they could have from Sam Presti if they just held a little firmer.
I don't hate it for Chicago either. I like it for both sides. I'm just surprised that, what you're saying, Oklahoma City has 1,000 picks. You're telling me they can't throw in like one on the, because straight up, if you're just looking at the players, Alex Caruso is the better player. He shot, I believe, 41% from three last year. And also he was 4th in steals. He's excellent at both ends of the floor, and he's going to fit perfectly with this Oklahoma City team. And I want to get into that in a little bit. But also moving Josh Giddey to a team where he can be the dominant point guard, depending on what happens with Zach LaVine this offseason. All indications are that the Bulls probably want to move on from him. And also Lonzo Ball hasn't played in 2 years. I think it could be a really good fit for Josh Giddey. I just don't understand. How can't you can't pry me away like a second rounder at least? I mean, they got a zillion of them and they can't use them all.
I agree. Look, let's also say the quiet part out loud as we're putting up. Oh, sorry, real quick. As we're putting up his stats, he was accused of some pretty frustratingly, if they had been true, ugly things over the course of the last 12 months, John. And those investigations led to nothing. He is not right. That has resolved itself. But that is a situation that he went through. And I think it's reasonable, if you're just looking at a basketball sense, to think that might have impacted his performance. It also certainly made him less popular in certain spaces. And as I understand it, maybe a little bit in Oklahoma City too. It became the butt of joke. So I also think that Giddey was primed for a reset somewhere else. And whatever happened off of the court, it certainly, I think, impacted the way he was viewed by some people in that organization. I think perhaps by some teammates, and his performance went down. So, and I'm sorry to cut you off there, but I think it's worth noting that if you're Chicago, you might think to yourself, all right, this is a dude who went through some off-court things. He didn't play well. Those could be correlated, and maybe going somewhere new and being a year removed from those allegations, and the conclusion of those allegations being that there have been no charges presented, and that is behind him now from a legal sense. Maybe that means he can get back to the form he was at. He's still a really young guy, and there's a huge ceiling there.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. I look at what the Bulls are doing, and I'm still a little confused, right? As a player, fine. Giddey's fine. I would like to kick the tires on Giddey, no problem. But okay, you might be moving on from Zach LaVine, probably too late, but better late than never. DeMar DeRozan's a free agent. Right. Yeah, DeMar DeRozan's a free agent. Like, we'll see what happens there. I would detonate the whole thing and blow it up. But if you're going to do that, Alex Caruso, you're telling me that like the Sixers, the Heat, the Thunder, teams with picks and cap space, the Magic wouldn't be like, you know what? Let's talk about this. We could maybe fetch a bigger price than just Josh Giddey. That's where I go and I look at the Bulls front office, and this has been true for a while now. What are they doing?
So I don't know. No one ever knows what they're doing in Chicago. I can tell you that talking to a few folks since this went down, it's a horribly run franchise. It has been for really, it's always been a poorly run franchise. They just had a guy named Michael Jordan who made everything look. They've been horribly run literally for the entirety of their existence, and they had the best or second best player of all time who kind of fixed that. And when Derrick Rose was there, a little bit of people that I've talked to, a few folks I talked to around the NBA, people in front offices, including a GM, think that it's rebuild time. That they look at Giddey not as some let's win now piece, or let's exchange this and we can be a play-in team, that Levine will go away, that they'll let DeRozan go. Maybe he can be a Sixer, John. Let him go do something somewhere else and sort of take his experience in the postseason, his scoring. I think it's a rebuild. And if it's a rebuild, and it better be, if you're going to trade Levine, you're right. You can probably get on paper a better return. As we both said, you could have gotten Giddey and I think and gotten a better return. But it probably also indicates that Chicago thinks that Josh Giddey is going to be still an extraordinary player for all the reasons that we've talked about. And they may just value Giddey and see a market opportunity in Chicago in going after a guy who didn't want to come off the bench, who did have some of these issues. Again, Sam Presti put in a statement, in effect, we traded him because he didn't want to be here and come off the bench. He said it nicely. So maybe Chicago felt like the price was depressed, right? And they were buying low. That's all my only explanation. I don't know what's going on otherwise.
Maybe. On the other side, though, and we have to get into the Oklahoma City side, Sam Presti, another master stroke. I love this for the Thunder. You get a better shooter and another guy who fits with a team that was already an awesome defensive team. Bill, they were top 5 defense last year with Giddey on the roster. Now they add Alex Caruso, who made second team all defense. And he, as I mentioned, 4th in steals last year. He'll be eligible in 6 months for a 4-year, $80 million extension. He's going to get it because he's that good. And now they have three of the best on-ball defenders in the NBA in Dort, Caruso, and then Cason Wallace. On top of that, you got Chet Holmgren and SGA and Jalen Williams. And they're not done yet, Bill. If they end up adding Isaiah Hartenstein's been rumored to be a big target for them. They're going to have to probably overpay to make him their backup big. But if you do that, because why not? You have a lot of cap space. You got to spend it on, well, you don't have to, but you could spend it on something like, say, a 2-year deal for Isaiah Hartenstein at like, I don't know, 50 million, maybe slightly south.
That's
of that,
exactly
more than the Knicks can offer.
Yeah.
Right. And then that also allows Isaiah Hartenstein to re-enter free agency at 28 when the cap goes up and you can get another long-term deal. It's like win-win. The Thunder here, and we're going to talk about the Celtics and dynasties and all that stuff coming up and which teams can be, problematic for the Celtics moving forward. The Thunder are setting themselves up to be like a budding young dynasty right now.
Do you know what it feels like? A little bit. It feels like, and there's some differences, but I have a similar feeling of, oh my God, what have they accomplished? Like I did with Boston in the last offseason. Now that Boston team last year obviously made the conference finals further than the Thunder made it, but the Thunder were the 1 seed. If Alex Caruso plays in that second round series, because Giddey missed a lot of big threes and a lot of open shots. And there just came a point where they're just like, if Alex Caruso is there and hitting some of those shots where momentum went certain directions, to say nothing of his defense, and you're right, they already have an amazing defense. Yeah, I'm with you. It's a perfect fit. And that's before you get into Hartenstein. So we'll see what happens. Maybe it's recency bias. Maybe it's just being so focused for obvious reasons on Boston the last few weeks. But when you take a really good team and you add perfect pieces that fit, that can play on both sides of the ball, and now it's just Caruso, right? It's not Porzingis was an addition along with Drew Holiday. But if you go and you get Hartenstein and you pay him whatever you got to pay him with the cap space that Presti has, in part because he's got all these guys on rookie deals and they're young.
Yep.
The Thunder could be the favorite next year. I mean, they won't be, but we could look back and say, just like we did Boston, of course they were so dominant. Look what Presti did in the offseason.
Yeah, young and like they're here now and they're going to be here in the future. It's really impressive. And there's also a possibility that they could be in on the Lauri Markkanen sweepstakes if that is something that becomes available. If Utah decides to move on, because again, they have this plethora of draft picks and the cap space to absorb them. And they're set up for quite a while. One more piece of business from yesterday that we should touch on: Malik Monk, who was probably the favorite for the 6th man of the year until he sprained his MCL late in the season. He re-signed with the Kings, 4 years at $78 million. He had a career high in points and assists last year. He's and also at just 26 minutes per game, he was like a real microwave player for them coming off the bench. Bill, this is a big deal for them, especially because they're keeping him at less than $20 million per season, which helps them avoid really going deep into that tax. This is a nice get for the Kings. And for Monk.
You and I both thought, you and I thought he'd be gone because everybody around the NBA thought he would go somewhere else and make more money, and maybe, like we talked about Hartenstein, maybe take a shorter deal for a whole bunch of cash and then get paid in a couple of years when all that new Amazon money floods into the CBA and the collective bargaining agreement and BRI. I love it. And what's the main takeaway for me is twofold. One is what you just said. Great move by the Kings. Perfect situation. He comes back. He's really important to what they do. But it doesn't make the Kings a contender. It just makes them sort of interesting and difficult in that middle of the pack. And it reinforces for me how brutal the Western Conference is. Because this is a win for the Kings. It's not a bad move. Congratulations.
Yep.
But this just keeps you on that hamster wheel where you're, what are they? I'm not even going to say 5, 6, 7, 8. Is that what they are?
Playing
in the Western Conference? They're playing team.
Playing probably. I like it for Monk. I think he probably just wanted to stay there because previously, early in his career, he was pretty lost. And he ends up in a good role with the Mike Brown team where Mike Brown knows exactly how to deploy him, right? I mean, he's that instant offense off the bench. And also they close with him. I think like if you're Malik Monk, you go, I like it here. My career's taken off here. I'm going to stay here. And then hopefully the Kings can figure out a way to add. Although, as you mentioned, Western Conference, very difficult. And it's so packed. So we're going to take a quick break and we're going to talk about exactly that because the Celtics are having their parade today. So we're going to discuss whether or not they're set up for a dynasty and then which teams in both the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference are best positioned to challenge them next season. You're watching Beyond the Arc on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to Beyond the Arc on CBS Sports Network. John and Bill here. Bill, today, I don't know, it might even be happening as we speak, as we record here. The Boston Celtics are NBA champions and they're holding their duck boat parade in Boston, a tradition that I've had enough of personally, but they just keep having these things. I guess we'll start with what you think the Celtics chances are of repeating next season, what kind of dynasty we might be looking at. I know you wrote about it for CBSSports.com. People should check that out. The lines have come out already for next year's teams. They're the favorites, not surprisingly, at 3-1. And as we mentioned,
margin,
all 5 starters, and they should be because Jason Tatum's about to get a max. Derek White is looking at a new contract, 4 years at probably around $125 million. Drew Holiday already got paid. Jaylen Brown already got paid. They got 2 more years of KP, and they got at least 1 more year of Horford. They're set up. This team's coming back, and they're really good.
Yeah, and they're the best team clearly in the NBA. They have every single piece together. And I think, and we've talked about this the day after, I want to say it again, usually when teams win championships or stars win championships, they talk about how it teaches them how to win more. And it really, I think, relieves some of the burden and the stress. We saw a great Jason Tatum in the playoffs, but he did not shoot particularly well, John. I'm not convinced that's who he is. I think you could see in the years ahead, Tatum having 2 or 3 at least massive games in series. They could be better. What we just saw, the team that is right now probably 20 Sam Adams deep per player, may be a better version of themselves next year just because they've already won one of these things. So, yeah, they are the absolute favorites. They showcase that everything that we talked about over the course of the regular season statistically was real, and it's going to be a very heavy lift trying to get past them in the East or whatever team comes out of the West, I think.
So when Joel Embiid was on prior to, I think it was game 5 or game 4, one of those, when he was on the ESPN broadcast, he was asked about whether or not he was looking at trying to challenge a Celtics dynasty. And he said, no, I don't think it's going to be a dynasty because of the new CBA. And I understand why he said that, because the Celtics are going to be, like a lot of teams, deep into that second apron. And for people who don't know quite what that is, just to like give you an idea, basically when you're into the into the tax, into the second apron, some restrictions happen on how you can build your team, right? And there's 4 teams that are in the second apron right now. It's the Celtics, the Wolves, the Suns, and the Denver Nuggets. And you lose your taxpayer mid-level exception. You can't aggregate salaries, which means like, instead of having 3 guys who add up to one of your superstars, I'm going to trade you 3 guys for a big superstar. Now it's got to be a 1-for-1 swap, so it's harder to get those superstars. You can't send cash out. Basically, you can re-sign your own players.
No buyout market.
Which is why this...
No buyout
market,
guys.
That's another big one.
Big.
You can re-sign your own players. Yeah. So like the Suns, that's why they ended up re-signing Grayson. I guess they like Grayson Allen, but also if they lost Grayson Allen, no chance to replace him. But it's that kind of thing, right? Your draft picks, you can re-sign that. You can sign them, and then like you can add veteran minimum contracts. The reason why I don't agree with Joel though is with respect to the Boston Celtics. If you're the Celtics, you go, yeah, we're cool with that. Like our first 5 are locked up. And if we can only add veteran minimums around them, like new Sam Hausers or Peyton Pritchards, like, okay, like what's the big deal? We're good.
I mean, let's draw a contrast with the Phoenix Suns, who you just noted are one of those 4 teams. They went into this position without proof of concept, without knowing whether it was going to work.
Yeah.
The Celtics had already been to 132 Eastern Conference Finals in the last 2 years, and obviously just won an NBA championship. And so when they give Derek White his money and when they give Jason Tatum his money, they are going to know that what they're spending money on, a team that is good enough to win an NBA championship. So, by the way, I love this. I love the second apron. I love that this is the way that it works because it's going to create more parity. I personally think it's better for the NBA, even if, the ratings weren't super high for this last one. But also, let's reward teams like the Celtics who built something and allow them to, the guys that you have, the guys that you brought in, you're allowed to retain those guys if you're willing to pay the price. And so I'm with you. The second apron and the way that the CBA works, which is meant to create more parity, it will work. Joel Embiid's right about that, but he's wrong about whether it affects the Celtics because everyone who's chasing them is going to have to flirt with that same reality without knowing if it's enough to beat Boston. Advantage Boston.
Yeah, they already have the pieces in place, and now they're fine. Provided, barring injury, but that's true for any team, really. Let's talk about teams that could potentially challenge them for a championship next season. We can start in the Western Conference because it's so loaded. The Denver Nuggets have the second best odds after the Celtics. They're 7-1 to win it all next year. But here's the thing with the Denver Nuggets, Bill. They got Joker, and then they have no other all-star on the roster now. Like Jamal Murray is a very, very good player, but still hasn't made an all-star team. I do too. KCP is a big-time question this offseason. If he opts out of his player option, it's going to be very difficult because, as we mentioned, they're one of those teams in the second apron for the Denver Nuggets to replace somebody of his caliber. So that cap situation is a significant problem for them. You and I had previously talked about, if they need to get under the tax to give themselves a little bit more flexibility or out of the second apron, rather, MPJ could potentially be somebody they'd unplug, but now you're really messing with a roster that worked and won a championship.
He's the critical piece. Jamal Murray does not have the line on his resume that makes him an all-star or an all-NBA player, but if you had those awards for the postseason, he'd have one. Yeah, he is. And he plays great in the playoffs, right? Tends to play outstanding in the playoffs. The MPJ thing is so interesting because you're right. Not only is that an option, that is a guy that and you have to do this. You have to do this now. If you draft someone, if you develop someone who you think can be a star, you have to pay him. You have to sort of bet on the come like you're in Vegas playing craps. That's the way that it is. And they won an NBA championship last year in which MPJ didn't play that well in the playoffs, especially in the NBA finals. And I think we all thought this year, I did. I'll speak for myself. I thought, MPJ, he'll figure it out. He wasn't great in this postseason. And so do you want to move on from him and create a little bit of flexibility? Or do you think that there's a player in there who you have paid to basically be the third best player in a championship level team, but to be, you don't have to be Anthony Davis or LeBron James, but you better be really, really good. Is that guy in there? And I think that is the decision for Denver. Do they think that Michael Porter Jr. can be good enough to be a spark in a couple series or a couple huge games? He's got the talent, John. And he went to Mizzou like I did, so I'm stupidly, not impartial. But I think I'd stick with him, but it's a really big decision because he hasn't been that guy for them, not yet.
Massive decision. And I understand why the odds makers have them as the second favorites because you have Joker and you have the best player in the world. And as long as you have him and also Jamal Murray, then that two-man game is incredible and you're going to have a chance. But the West is, as we keep mentioning, incredibly loaded. And there's three other teams here that I want to get to that are all lumped in basically the same odds. You got the Dallas Mavericks next, just lost to the Boston Celtics in the finals in 5 games. They're at 8-1, followed by two teams at 9-1 that I'm actually higher on. The Minnesota Timberwolves at 9-1 and also Oklahoma City, who were at 9-1 before that trade, Bill. And again, they're not done tinkering, as we mentioned. What do you make? Two different situations here, because the Mavericks, they do have some cap flexibility. They are under the first apron. They can send out a couple picks. They've been trying. Tim Hardaway Jr.'s got an expiring contract. Maybe if you package him with some picks and Maxi Kleba, you could get back another star. And then you've got the Timberwolves, who they are deep into that second apron. They're in the middle of an ownership fight, and they got to decide what they're going to do about Karl Anthony Towns and whether or not they want to just stay in the second apron and run it back and hope for the best.
You have to, right? I mean, you have to. I mean, you don't know who the owner is, so I don't even know who I'm imploring to spend the money. You have to. I think so. Here, the problem with the West is that I'm about to say the Minnesota Timberwolves are good enough to make. They are good enough. They are a championship level team. They are unproven in that respect. They have obviously not made it far enough. They have not made it to an NBA Finals. There's some intangibles that come into play. They are good enough. And Anthony Edwards, I think, is going to continue to get better. I think he's a legit superstar, and there's a ceiling there. The problem is there are a lot of those teams in the Western Conference. The Nuggets qualify. Obviously, the Mavs qualify. I would put the Thunder ahead of everybody on that list, John, except maybe Denver. They qualify, and I know that the Spurs aren't a championship contender this year, but I think that they're going to be a force much more quickly than people think. I think a year from now, whoever wins an NBA championship a year from now, I think you and I are having a conversation about how San Antonio that next season is good enough. So if you're Minnesota, you have to keep up in this arms race. You just have to say, we're good enough. So are 3 or 4 other teams. Probably there's a team or two they're going to add to that equation. And you spend the money on Cat. You keep this thing together. You already gave away 4 first-round picks for Rudy Gobert in order to put this team together. I think you spend the money, you roll it back, you operate in the margins, and you hope that you come out a little bit better in the playoffs than you did this last time around.
We got a bunch of other teams that we didn't even get to, like the Lakers and the Suns, who are 25-1, Warriors and the Clippers, who are 28-1, the Grizz, who are going to have a healthy John Morant back, ostensibly at 33-1. They're going to be back in the mix. We forgot about Memphis. Quickly, just because we got to go to break. If you had to pick one of those teams from the West, it's super early. I mean, we're in June here. We're not even into July.
I love this stuff.
Who's your front runner?
All right, recency, but give me the Thunder. I think their playoff experience that they just got, the addition of Caruso, the moves they're going to make, the cap space. Yeah, give me Oklahoma City.
I just love how they've positioned themselves. They're super fun. And I really like that. I was an early adopter for the Thunder, but I like that you've come over to the side. And now we're I'm going to get both of us a Thunder jersey and we'll hang it up because I'm done with the Sixers jersey, but we got to, I'll hang one up for you.
I'm going to get one.
We'll see. I'll see if I can change your mind about that. All right, we're going to take a break. And then on the other side, we're going to get into the Eastern Conference contenders, a little bit thinner, Bill, than the Western Conference, but we'll talk about that on Beyond the Arc. This is CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to Beyond the Arc. John and Bill here. You're watching us on CBS Sports Network. You can also find us on our YouTube page. Check that out over at Beyond the Arc CBS. Please subscribe, hit the like button, leave us a comment. We check all that stuff. We have good stuff over there for you. Bill, we talked about the Western Conference. A lot of teams in the Western Conference that can challenge the Boston Celtics. Eastern Conference, less exciting. Milwaukee Bucks right now have the best odds in the East to win a championship next season at 10-1. Second year, Giannis and Dame. I'm still not entirely sold on this. Your guy, Doc, you got a full year of Doc. How do you feel about the Bucks next year?
I would rather take the $100 that I would bet on them at those odds, John, set it on fire and put it in a glass as a conversation starter at a party at my home than bet on the Milwaukee Bucks. I was thinking about this the other day. I love Dame. And I'm not saying that he's washed, but I do think that you can at least start to have a worry and a conversation if things don't go well next year. And it's clear that he and Giannis just have not been a great fit. They haven't been. It is clear that the removal of Drew Holiday was critical. I would take other teams, at least a couple in the Eastern Conference, over Milwaukee if I had to pick a team who wasn't Boston to come out of the East.
Yeah, part of me goes, they got Giannis, so they're going to have a chance because he's that good. I'm with you on their pairing that it didn't look the way that I expected it to, and I don't think that Doc is a miracle worker. My concern for the Milwaukee Bucks is when you look at how they built this team, like they're pretty locked into this. I mean, they're over the first apron, and I don't know what they're going to do. Like, I guess you could unplug Chris Middleton and try to move the pieces around the board, but that didn't work out for you when you unplugged Drew Holiday. It ended up being a disaster. I don't know. Yeah.
I don't think a lot enough.
I mean, I like Chris Middleton, but he has an injury history. He's getting older, and that contract doesn't look nearly as good as it did previously, but I also don't think is currently constituted. I'm with you that the Milwaukee Bucks are a team that probably isn't going to win a championship next season. So I don't know what you do. I mean, you committed to this Giannis and Dame thing. I guess you have to leave it in place, but I have other teams ahead of them as well. One of which, by the way, so the next two teams on the odds list, I'm actually kind of surprised by this. The Sixers are next at 14-1, and then the Knicks at 16-1. I would have the Sixers have 2 players under contract. I'd have the Knicks ahead of them.
So here's the thing. Like, I think it's the same reason that the Bucks are so high. The Sixers have by far the better player. And Joel Embiid is by far the best player out of the teams on the Sixers. But I like the Sixers too. Like, I like the Sixers. I would take the Sixers a little bit over
who's playing for the Sixers?
A little bit over the Sixers. Well, that's the thing. I don't know, but I'm not sure. But they have so Maxi's a restricted free agent. He'll be back. They're gonna pay him all the money, and then you have to go and build it out. But if you have one more star and you think Daryl Morey can do a pretty good job supplementing that, I would take that team if Embiid's healthy. That's what it always is. But I like the Knicks too, John. I know Ash is the Knicks fan here, so this isn't emotional for me, and this isn't, maybe we're off here. I think they can be outstanding if they can stay healthy. And for me, that is whether or not Tibbs can just not play these guys 46 minutes a game. And if OG resigns, that's a big one. Anunoby's got to be back, but I think he will be.
Yeah. Yeah, they have a question about OG. They've got a question about Isaiah Hartenstein. I still like their team, though, better than I like the Sixers team, because I don't know who's on the Sixers team aside from Embiid and Maxey. And Shams reported yesterday, actually, that, obviously PG was the top target for the Sixers, who can free up about $65 million in cap space. That just makes sense on so many levels. You don't have to trade for him. You've got the cap space. He slides in as your third guy. He plays at both ends of the floor. He wouldn't have as much pressure. Well, maybe not, because Philly media and fans are absolutely, bonkers, but still, it makes an easier path, all this stuff. But Shams reported that the Sixers' interest in him has, quote, significantly waned in recent days, and the Sixers are now expected to be aggressive elsewhere. I don't know if this is like a negotiating tactic or whatever, but you look at the other potential targets, Bill, it gets real thin real fast. If OG doesn't opt out of his player option, you're trying to trade for Brandon Ingram maybe, or maybe you mentioned DeMar DeRozan. Who knows what's going to happen with Bruce Brown in Toronto? I don't want any
LeBron James is out there, Johnny.
That would be great, I guess, at this point. But you can't even get a Malik Monk because he's staying in Sacramento. I don't know what they're going to do here. Maybe they do get involved in the Lauri Markkanen sweepstakes. I think that actually would be a very good fit for them. But Daryl Morey, Bill, set himself up for this. It's a high wire act with no net.
Yeah, and by the way, he had some failures in Houston in this respect too. I mean, he obviously James Harden was there, but he wasn't able to land some of the players he thought he was going to get, and settled for Russell Westbrook and Chris Paul, and those that did not work out. You have an Embiid and Maxey, if they're both playing, maybe as good a duo as anybody in the NBA when Embiid is healthy. I mean, I think Embiid is that good that if you can just fill it out a little bit, I like. But you're right. I like this team because I like Embiid and Maxey, but there is no team beyond them, so it's hard to make an argument for them because I don't know who it is.
Yeah, I love when you said fill it out a little bit, and it's like the entire rest of the team. so right. We'll see what Daryl Morey can pull off. We're going to take another quick break, and then Beyond the Arc rolls on right here on CBS Sports Network. Thank you so much. Welcome back to Beyond the Arc. As you saw there, Bill's going to pull double duty. You can catch him on HQ right after this. Bill, next week, we got a ton of draft coverage right here on Beyond the Arc. You pumped for an entire week of that?
Yeah, is it officially renamed the Bronny James 2024 NBA Draft? Can't wait. There's other players too, guys. Those of you out there.
Not this year, evidently. There's a bunch of people that most of us, including you and I, have only kind of heard of, and then Bronny James.
Fair.
Do we think he's going to go in the first round or probably not, right? I mean, you think anybody reaches?
No, but I do like a media member that used to work for was out there saying that the Celtics should take him and just hold the Lakers hostage. And that's something that I've talked about with you on the show. I don't think it's realistic, but I would do it if I was a GM. Absolutely.
We'll see what happens. Join us next week on CBS Sports Network at 2 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We'll have our draft experts, Adam Finkelstein and Kyle Boone here, as well as Bill and I. But for now, thanks so much for watching and listening to Beyond the Arc. Everybody, have a great weekend.